Welcome back, Beastcoast Pokemon fans, for today's special edition of the Worlds 2023 Pokemon Recap. Got myself, James, Aaron, and Wolfey all here to break down all the action that happened over in Yokohama, Japan. And that was such a fun experience. I kind of just want to start out with that. Like, how did you all feel about going to Japan and to be able to enjoy Pokemon there?
I like Japan. Like, I don't think anyone here is gonna say they didn't like Japan. Pokemon wise, we might have some different opinions though.
Yeah, what I'll say is that Japan was incredible. I mean, at least for me personally, it's a place that I always wanted to go but never was able to, just for a number of different reasons. So to finally be able to visit and kind of experience it for myself was really, really special. It's an incredible place, and in many ways it feels like it's kind of living in the future. Like, there's a lot of things about Japan, at least to me, very far ahead of the rest of the world. It was cool to kind of like experience that in person and, I don't know, like see the culture and all that.
Yeah, I think it is probably my favorite country to visit. Just being able to attend Worlds after, we've all been to like a fair amount of Worlds, and to even if just like leaving the US for Worlds is always like a really cool idea. And last year was really the first year since we went to Vancouver back in 2013. Yeah, it was awesome. It is interesting because we're lucky that so many Worlds are in North America. I was like, oh, it's really weird like adjusting to all this jet lag. Like, I've actually never had to deal with that before for like Worlds. I actually like did not sleep well the entire trip, so I was like, I need to learn a little bit more for future Worlds. Overall, had a really good time.
+1 to the no sleep thing. Also, very much seconded that it was really awesome to be able to see how much the Japanese fans were able to actually enjoy the brand, especially with Worlds being in Japan for the first time. I think that was something that I was really blown away by, was just how much love and support there was for Pokemon just in Japan itself. That was really unique to also just see kind of some of the pop-up experiences that were there. Like, what was one of your favorite things that you did outside of the venue, if you got a chance to do anything else?
I think the city of Osaka was like just amazing. Like, there were a bunch of places I could just name that Japan was just amazing. I think we all explored. Osaka for me was, I got to go clubbing and partying with like a bunch of like non-Pokemon players and Pokemon players at the same time. Got to go to Summer Sonic, which is like this huge music festival in Japan. It was actually my first music concert event kind of thing ever, so that was just like really cool. Seeing one of my favorite like duos of all time was incredible. So yeah, I just really like Osaka. The area is just really awesome. Late night city kind of vibe, similar to New York, so just felt like at home. It's just really enjoyable.
If I have to pick just one, I had some really cool experiences at some of like the anime pop-up events around the country. So I went to this really cool Spy Family exhibit. I think it was in Osaka, if I'm not much mistaken, when I was there, and that was really, really cool. And then I actually there's a pretty niche anime that I'm a fan of that isn't very popular called Zatch Bell. I watched it. Do you know Zatch Bell?
I feel like it's pretty popular.
Okay, I feel like I rarely run into people who have seen it, so maybe that's why I have that impression. But yeah, I like really loved it as a kid, and I was just like walking through a train station, and I was like, wait a second, and there was this whole like pop-up Zatch Bell store that was just like chilling in the train station. So that was like a really cool kind of moment for me.
I unfortunately had to go right back to the US for work, and so I left pretty shortly after the tournament. I love everything about Japan, honestly. I think especially the convenience stores. Like, I had so many onigiris. I was lucky enough to actually go a few months ago for vacation, actually. It's hard to point to one specific thing. I'm actually super jealous of James getting to attend that music festival. Like, one of my goals every time I try to travel internationally is like go to a concert. I've been very unsuccessful in doing that, but it's something that after missing out on during a bunch of other Pokemon events international, I was like, I really want to do. They did have those like pop-up Pokemon events throughout the city, and I went to this one like 15-minute show, and it was just all like these different characters like Greninja and Lucario and Cinderace like dancing, and it was really cool. It actually like started raining right at the very end. It was cool because there were like so many little kids that were there, and seeing how excited they were specifically, like everyone just like lost their mind when like Greninja popped out specifically. The kids were all cheering so loudly, and I was like, it's just so adorable, honestly. So that was really cool to see. But like the performers and the dancers were honestly incredible as well, and I was like, I'd pay for like an hour and a half show of this. Like, it was only 15 minutes. That was awesome. I think that was the only like Worlds related event that I got to do outside the venue, but that made me very fulfilled and happy.
I got a chance to do the Pikachu parade, and very much like I feel like what your experience was, it was just 100 Pikachu marching down the street, dancing with music, and also a bunch of the other characters. And I didn't even know that they had that many extra like people to do that. I don't know. It seems like you have to fit a specific body type to like fit into a suit. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't actually share the magic of that one. But anyway.
What do you mean? Those are real Pikachus. They come in all different sizes.
That's what I mean. Like, how do they have so many Pikachus that have gone to Pikachu school and graduated to be able to dance and sing and all that stuff? It's pretty phenomenal. But what we're actually here for is to talk about the Pokemon World Championships, just the fact that it was also a very difficult tournament overall. I feel like one of the key features of it that we talked about even in the preview, James, that you did, is that it was the very first event of Regulation D, which is kind of unheard of when it comes to how the World Championships have actually functioned in the past, where it's usually like at the capstone of a format, and this was just kind of a one-of at the very beginning of it. Come to find out, there's going to be more regional championships with the same format. It was the first tournament of Regulation D. How did you feel like that went in terms of prep or what you expected to face?
So Regulation D, it's interesting. You had obviously all these new Pokemon from home, from the Legends of Arceus games, and then Sword and Shield coming back, or Shifu probably like one of the most dominant ones right there, and definitely an annoying Pokemon to play around. Prep wise, it felt kind of strained in a way because it depended on like when you left, right? A lot of difference in between prep for players, because not only there's the time difference. For instance, you could have started Regulation D when they first announced it, and if you weren't competing at like the North American International Championship, you were actually going to be able to get a little bit more time. Granted, it probably wasn't going to be the best practice, but like any knowledge in the format, I think is just like valuable. So there's that factor. And then like actually traveling to Worlds. So there are players who also traveled earlier for Worlds and was like exploring Japan. And then based on teams that we saw, nothing really out of surprise for me that we saw at the event. There's just like a lot of different structures and of course just common Pokemon that we would expect to see.
I got something to say, and it's not gonna be level-headed. It's not gonna be middle of the road. I got an actual opinion for once. Ready?
Let's hear it. Let's hear the
Let's
opinion,
go.
man.
Regulation D is one of the worst decisions Pokemon has ever made. I didn't want to really think about it too much prior to Worlds because it wasn't going to help. But Pikachu, if you're watching this, triple thumbs down from me. I'm going to grow an extra thumb just to tell you this was a terrible decision. Like, reflecting on it, the fact that we got a format where we had no time to prep. And not only did we have no time to prep, basically a month and a half if you were actually playing at North American Internationals, which I think a lot of the player base was. Worlds was in Japan, which actually added a ton of time for most of the world in terms of travel and jet lag adjustment. It's not just that it was a totally new format, it's that the format was so different from the entire rest of the year. I would say that a lot of the strategies and a lot of the ways of playing the game, not even just oh, King Lu is a strong Pokemon, or Iron Bundle is a strong Pokemon, not even talking about the specifics, but actual trends in terms of the types of teams that succeeded were radically different. And a lot of the teams that were able to work in Regulations A, B, and C did not work at all in Regulation D because the power level jumped up so much. And I think a lot of that has to do with Urshifu personally, but that's kind of a different subject. But yeah, I think that this Worlds really felt, to me, it felt unfair in a way that Worlds doesn't normally feel, because it did not feel like players were given adequate time to prepare for such a radically different format. That's my take. Who else think it?
I think, I will give the commentator perspective, which is, I was like, wow, if I were playing in this would probably be the most stress I'd ever be preparing for the tournament. But I think from the commentator / spectator POV, I was like, I'm really excited to see what teams and strategies end up on top. I thought going into this Worlds, there'd be more teams that would be unorthodox. And I think if you look at the top cut teams, there are actually very few teams that actually fit that bill. Michael Kilsh's team, who got second, featured a lot of things that we'd already seen succeed before, like Dragapult and Champow, for example, and Farigiraf. I actually don't think I would have predicted that personally to make the finals. So it's cool to see him make such a deep run. Definitely wish we could have seen him play before the finals on stream. And then we had Emilio Forbes, who had the Bramblegast, kind of tailwind comp. And then I think the teams that I probably stood out to me the most in the top 32 were Joe UX9's Wo Qian team. Having tried it, I actually think it was a really, really smartly constructed team and very different from teams that I've seen Joe use in previous seasons. And I think very few people were just prepared against Wo Qian specifically. And I thought he mitigated or improved this matchup against Tornadus Water Urshifu really well, which was trending upwards going into the tournament. And then my favorite team probably from the top 32 was Kenji Yabata's, which we featured on stream in a win-in with dual screens Grimmsnarl, and then just tons of really, really bulky Pokemon with Cursed Dondozo. Nick Navarre also had a really interesting team with Draining Kiss Fluttermane, which had been, I know some people were testing going into Worlds. But other than those, I think most of the teams that did well were teams that you would have expected to do well. I thought this might have been a year for another Pachirisu moment, this one niche Pokemon that people aren't really prepared for is going to catch everyone off guard. I tried Spectrier with Nasty Plot before Worlds. I was like, this is cracked. I love this Pokemon. Pokemon. So I was like, I want something like that to really succeed. But in the end, yeah, I think the power level was just so much dramatically higher, like Wolf mentioned. As a result, you had so many strong Pokemon being used that, you know, were expected to be used. But that being said, I actually think the stream games were crazy. Like Rose, I feel like you and I, every game we casted was like actually so wild. Like one of those normally, getting one of those in a tournament I'm happy with, and I feel like we got like 4 or 5 of them, which was amazing.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like this event in particular was the most fun to cast, not just from our games, but also just from watching what everyone else also got to cover. Yeah, every single game that we saw on stream was phenomenal. I feel like we ended up getting a chance to see the craziest plays I feel like we would have never expected to see at a regional level, and then let alone the World Championships. I feel like that was super exciting to watch. I would not have wanted to prep for this one. That is for sure something that I can look at and say no thank you. But I feel like too, to also the other points about preparation, Japan kind of crushed it. Like across every single age division, Japan won juniors, seniors, and masters. And I wonder just how much of that was the amount of prep work they got a chance to do, knowing that nationals, they had already secured their spots and they could dive right into Regulation D.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that Japan did well. I think actually in my Worlds preview, I predicted for mainly Japan and Europe to do well at this event, and I think I was like pretty much on the mark. And mainly because I felt like most of the players who did well, like again, that extra bit of prep time could really matter. Japan, of course, didn't have to prepare for NIC. They have their own circuits, so just like getting that extra timing, as well as Michael Kelsch, really great player. He's also just been grinding the online tournaments. He's been using that team for a while, and it's like really impressive to see his run at the World Championship. He was actually one of my picks for like a favorite player to do really well at this event, and he absolutely crushed it. I think Japan's was pretty interesting on like how they ended up prepping, because the team that you saw Shohei Kimura won was like a pretty standard team that we saw like a bunch of Japanese players run. But the thing is, if you played ladder at all, like Battle Stadium or Showdown, you actually really did not see this comp too much. And the way you would actually know about this team, how I knew about this team and several other players knew, were basically Japan like usually hosts their own best of 3 tournaments, and a lot of players were actually using this team throughout those tournaments. So that's how you would pretty much know. Otherwise, you really would not have seen this team commonly otherwise.
I'm going to contradict you a little bit, which is that you're not wrong. In our testing, we played against this team quite a bit on Showdown, and the reason was that we were in Japan early. So you said you didn't leave till later, so if you played during like Japan daytime, which is, you know, middle of the night Eastern, then you would run into the team like a fair bit. Most of the time when Americans and like most Europeans were practicing, all the Japanese players would be asleep. I think that's interesting. Definitely like time zone hacks coming in there. Also, I want to do a little bit of being a contrarian as well. I think that there's kind of this idea that like Japan is the strongest region in Pokemon, and on the whole, I actually agree with that. I mean, Japan is more World Championship won than any other region after this, and the only reason it was even close before is because of Ray. But the real thing that I think is really interesting here is that Japan did not get any open team sheet practice for the entire year. This was their first open team sheet format. And like, I think that like that was actually an advantage that America and Europe had over Japan this year, because having practice in what's basically a totally different format is a pretty big deal. Not to mention the fact that Japan often has a lot of best of 1 tournaments. And so, but best of 1 closed team sheet, the combination of those really encourages strategies that are very unorthodox and very unusual. And we often see a lot of very strange teams coming out from Japan, and I think that there is a world where that could have held them back a little bit. You know, we had a whole year of extra practice against compared to Japan, and like I don't think that was irrelevant practice. Like I think the adjustment is actually not super intuitive, and so the fact that they did so well, despite the fact that their circuit did not set them up for success, I think is a testament to the Japanese players' skill.
Yeah, like I think one thing that's really interesting is when I think of Japan, I think specifically at Worlds, you have like a lot of the players that decide I'm just gonna run what I think is objectively like the best team, right? And so we saw that in 2015, like that's the year that gets the most discourse, because there were 7 Japanese players in top 8, and almost all of them basically had like the same chalkwork, Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, Landorus, Kangaskhan, and that ended up winning the tournament. And that team had already been pretty popular in Japan, obviously throughout the entire year, and they dominated that Worlds. And the 2016 happens, the year Wolf wins, where a lot of the top Japanese players, including Shohei, were like, I'm just gonna use like the big 6 team of Groudon, Xerneas, you know, and everyone's been using this since day 1 of the format, but like I believe that that's the best pick, and like they bombed that World Championship. Championship. They did not do well at all. So I thought that was really interesting. I think last year at Worlds in particular, I remember I've casted a lot of Shohei's games just throughout the years, and I think he was using kind of, I want to say it was Kyogre Zacian team if I remember correctly, but maybe it was Groudon Zacian. I think it was Kyogre Zacian. But like, you either have the players that maybe work a little bit more independently and bring like absolutely crazy stuff, but then like a lot of their best players are just like, I'm just gonna work with the other best players and use what I think are objectively like the best Pokemon in the format. And I thought this Worlds was interesting because it's like, yeah, there were 4 versions of the same team that won Worlds in the top 16, all piloted by Japanese players. I don't know actually the exact origin behind the team. Like I feel like I had heard that Shohei was the creator himself.
That's what I heard as well, yeah.
I was wondering if like all the other players had, you know, like input on the team building process as well, or whether or not Shohei just like gave it to other players. Because I know like one player that I really had my eyes out on, I thought was the favorite to him, was Kaito Arii, who is the Japanese national champion, and he ended up bringing the exact same team as well. So to me, it was interesting. And actually, having played the world champion team like on Battle Stadium after Worlds, I was like, this team is actually not that easy to use, and it doesn't actually feel like that strong in like closed team sheet best of 1. So I thought that's what was really interesting, where like I was like, if I were just like testing this on Showdown, I'm not sure I'd actually feel super confident on it. It makes sense why it's so successful in best of 3 open team sheet, because it's like you just have so many tools at your disposal, right? Like you just are using Pokemon with the best stats and have some small techs that really go a long way. Like there was like Energy Ball, Grass Terra, Fluttermane, for example, Taunt on Urshifu, Shohei had Safety Goggles on Landorus Therian as well, and then he brought back kind of the more conventional Chien-Pao stat rather than running like double ice type. Like he had Sacred Sword on that set as well. So all of that is to say, like, yeah, I thought it was interesting because having tried out the team myself, I was like, it feels strong, but it doesn't feel like, oh, this just like beats everything. But in an open team sheet environment where I think the better player wins more frequently, it makes sense that this ended up on top. Kind of adding on Wolf's point, which is that this is a format that the Japanese players aren't as used to. To their credit, they performed incredibly well, which was very impressive.
I think what's also really impressive is just seeing the longevity of these teams as well. Like taking a look at how Shohei's team went and just how much popularity had picked up even after the World Championships to still secure a bunch of wins in these online grassroots tournaments. And then another credit to give is to like Hirofumi Kimura's team, which is also dominating online ladder in these tournaments as well. I think that was also just a strong testament to the team building that happened for this Worlds in particular, and is a nice, I guess, notch to have for the Japanese too, just to give them credit for that. I feel like there were other regions, like I individually had pegged North America as the favorite to win, not just because of the practice that North America was able to get from just having more events in the circuit, as well as just more time with being able to play like best of 3 open team sheet, but also because I figured that there would be a lot of creativity. I feel like there are a lot of smaller team building groups that I feel like would have tried to bring spice to the World Championships.
I think this World Championship, it's not bad to say like pick what you're comfortable with or like what works. Like a lot of these teams have like the top mons pretty much. There are a few things like Michael, who got second again, running a team he's been very comfortable with. He's been literally dominating the online tournament scene with that. Federico, who got top 4 at this event with the Ursaluna and Interfocus Terraflying Dragonite, which is something interesting to see come back. He actually ended up winning an online tournament like a week before Worlds with that exact same 6. So I think it's just like bringing what you expect to do well, and it's also like something that you can highlight to a comfortable level. Marco Silva, like him bring basically the Regulation C team, literally with Roaring Moon, back once again, and he ended up making it into the top 16. And then there's obviously some tech picks, like we mentioned Emilio Forbes' Bramblegast, who when he told me he was running that like 3 weeks before a tournament, I honestly thought he was joking. Like I did not expect him to actually be bringing Bramblegast. And then I asked him like a week after, like, hey, are you still planning to bring Bramblegast? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, okay, he actually is bringing Bramblegast, which I was surprised.
Yeah, I think that also in terms of talking about regions, like I actually think that NA was pretty strong this entire year, and I don't think we had anybody in top 4. I think top 8 was as far as.
Yeah, it was Sempra who was the highest placing in top 8.
Right. So I think that like it was definitely possible for players to go further. I also think that like, again, with this was just such a volatile world championship. Yeah, I think that like it was the first event of a format we'd also never experienced where the rule set for Worlds didn't match the rule set for the entire rest of the year. So I think it was like really hard to make predictions, and that, yeah, I don't even know if all the experience throughout the year was especially helpful at Worlds, in all honesty. Yeah. Like I actually think that it might have been more kind of, you built a team that had a similar philosophy to the teams that did well in regulations A, B, and C. I actually think there might be, you could maybe make an argument that the the having a lot of experience in Scarlet and Violet's competitive formats might actually work against you because the lessons learned were not the lessons you needed to know going into Worlds.
I think, yeah, one other interesting thing, North America did have a lot of players in Top Cut. It's just that most of them ended up losing in the first round immediately. And so we only had Emilio and Sempra left. Emilio's situation with the disconnect definitely super unfortunate. Something that I hope doesn't happen at Worlds in the future. Like, this is more, I guess, commentary on the game itself, but like we had that happen at Worlds last year with Galisapod on stream in top 32 as well. And it feels really bad, I guess, to be playing a competitive game that like can't reset a game state, honestly. Or yeah, I mean, Abdullah, what a story that is, right? I think one of the other things that really stood out to me this Worlds was newer players doing so well, right? I mean, Michael Kelch literally picked up the game less than a year ago, ended up almost winning Worlds, right? I was thinking about it. I was like, I've been playing this game for like 15 years. I mean, this guy's first 8 months, like he's made it further at Worlds than I have. Like, that's crazy to think about. It's really impressive. And he is, I think most consider him to be the best random. He is just objectively the best random battler in the world. Posted some tweet the other day where he was like 100 points ahead of number 2 on ladder, which I was like, what the heck? But it was really cool. I got to play him at EUIC and to just like slay him in round 1, and now he like gets finals at Worlds. Like, what an amazing story. And then you also had Abdullah, aka Sempro, who won his very first tournament he ever attended in Vancouver Regionals, and then finished top 8 with, I think, one of the teams that I really liked. And then a European player as well, Nikolaj Nielsen, who used kind of a trick room oriented team to climb all the way to the top as well. I think he might have started playing literally in 2022. So I think that's really cool. If you're a new player and you're watching this, like, you really can have a deep run at Worlds and potentially be a world champion, even if you just started playing. With 3 of these top 8 players coming into the scene really in the last year or two, I think that story in itself is really incredible. But yeah, I don't know. To me at Worlds, it's always like once top cut starts, it feels like a lot of the players, most players within that top cut can win. It's just who really has the best day. And I think like this Worlds was such a marathon. Like last year in London, top cut was separated from day 2 as well. All the players had a day to like recharge and think about their matchups past just like their first opponent as well. This World just was like one of the longest day 2s we've ever had, right? Like you have 7 rounds and then like so many rounds of top cut afterwards, and the tournament like had delays throughout as well. So kind of just like a battle of mental stamina as well, and it's a marathon, and like who can convert that and has the most mental strength, good luck, and best matchups overall is the one that's going to end up on top. So at the end of the day, I feel like if you replay this top cut over and over again, would it look the same? I'm not really sure. For those that were rooting for North America, unfortunate that so many of the players got eliminated early on in the first round, but a lot of North America's best did really show up in day 2, right? And like a lot of the day 2 players that had qualified by making day 2 initially from the CP circuit ended up doing really well. And so yeah,
I would love to see us go back to a 4-day Worlds format. I don't know if that's the popular opinion, but to your point, Aaron, I do feel like not having that separation from day 2 Swiss to top cut severely hurt a ton of players that were going from that section of the tournament to the next one. It's also just nice to be able to celebrate things in just a capsule as well. From a commentary perspective, I love being able to give each day its own merits. So like if you have day 1 of Swiss on day 1, and then you have day 2 of Swiss on day 2, and then you have the top cut, and then of course like Championship Sunday, it feels easier to also follow the storylines versus it just being a blur for a long day. That day was also one of the longest I think you and I had ever worked an event. That ended up being something like a 17-hour day for us, 18 hours.
Yep. I think we got there at 7 and we weren't out until 10 or 11, so
yeah, that was a rough one. So not just for the players, of course, but also selfishly, it would be nice to have a little bit more of an ability to just be able to focus on that day instead of just, I am tired. I think everyone is tired at this point.
I think I'm curious to get your guys' perspective. Are there Pokemon that you think overperformed or Pokemon that underperformed? Like I thought Heatran would have a slightly bigger impact. Like it felt like Grass Terra Heatran and all the unique things you could do with Heatran going into Worlds was like super interesting. And in the end, I like counting, there was 1 in the finals, obviously, 1 in 6th place, and 1 in 16th place, but only 3 teams in the top 16 had it. So I was actually kind of surprised at how few Heatran there were, because I thought that was like easily just one of the most consistent Pokemon going into Worlds. I'm curious what you guys think.
It's interesting. For me, one of the Pokemon that I was kind of expecting, but kind of didn't get to showcase at all, the best case being like a solo performer doing the best, was Dundozo. Like we saw Commander Dundozo usually do well throughout the entire season, but like the best one ended up being like Vishir, I think, Curse Set, which is not really what you would have expected, I think, from like Dundozo in general. And I think like a lot of players didn't even end up bringing the Tatsugiri Dundozo at all to this World Championship, which is kind of interesting because it didn't feel like people were bringing specific counters to it. So it might have actually had a lot of potential depending on like sets you could bring. So that was something I thought was pretty interesting. Roaring Moon, I felt like had a bit more usage than I would have expected, but kind of makes sense in a way. I think it might actually be better in this format, but just never something I really thought of until like seeing it at the World Championship, like how well it was able to perform. Gyarados was also another one I was kind of surprised to see like a bunch of players bring, just because I think Urshifu, like water type, I felt like everyone would be using the water Urshifu. I would have expected probably a little bit more of darker Urshifu to perform. There were quite a few, but I felt like that Pokemon definitely had a lot of potential. And no Regidragos, I think, like in Cut. I was actually surprised since it did really well in like the online tournaments prior to Worlds, but like I don't think one even made it into the top cut.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Mons that stood out to me, I think Dragonite actually kind of overperformed a bit. I didn't really have Dragonite on my radar very much. It felt like with kind of the dropping off Dragonite Chow from the format, just like Dragonite was kind of going to fall out of usage, but the combination of like Speed Booster Flutter and Life Orb Dragonite with Nikolai.
Yeah, Nikolai and Federico.
Yeah, Federico as well. I thought that was interesting. And I like Goldengo didn't have a bad performance per se, but it didn't do quite as well as I would have expected. Like, I feel like Goldengo is one of the strongest. I mean, in terms of non-Paradox Pokemon, Goldengo is definitely up there in terms of one of the strongest new Generation 9 Pokemon. And though it had some usage, I think I would have expected more personally. Iron Hands being one of the best Pokemon in the format, like, and Heatran's appearance. Like, I think it's like not super metagame favored, but I still would have expected a little more Goldengo, I think.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I feel like it ended up doing quite well in terms of how many were able to actually get victories within Top Cut, but even just seeing where Goldengo actually finished, it's actually quite high. Like, most Goldengo players actually averaged like even like 4-3 on day number 2, so I thought that was kind of special to see, but the fact that there weren't more that made it forward was a little surprising to me. But even more so, like, even just not looking at Iron Hands usage, I thought that there would be more rain. That was an archetype that I thought might have come a little bit more often than it actually did. And even just looking at something like a Basculegion, looking at Last Respects as one of its strongest attacks, I thought that might be able to actually do a little bit more damage, but that also wasn't super popular.
Yeah, I really wish, like, it was cool because, like, you know, with the new regulation, it's like, oh, all these Legends Arceus Pokemon get introduced. We never played with them before. But then it's like, you have then Landorus and Urshifu and, you know, all these, like, super strong Pokemon that just, like, raise the kind of bar so much higher. So as a result, like, very few Hisuian Pokemon were even brought to Worlds, other than like Arcanine, which had a really good performance, and Ursaluna. So I do wonder like how things would have looked if Regulation D was just like only the Legends Arceus Pokemon and not like all of these other ones. Because yeah, I thought like a lot of the Hisuian Pokemon had potential. Basculegion was one that I actually thought would do really well because I feel like a lot of groups were talking about it and it ended up just not really making an impact at all. I was sad to see that we didn't see as many Hisuian Pokemon represented in the top or even brought to the tournament at all.
I wanted Weirdeer. I wanted it to happen.
That was a little ambitious, I think.
It is, but I was thinking and hoping just for like Ursaluna shenanigans or something like that. I don't know.
One question I have for all of you then is, you know, we are really nearing the end of this regulation. Like we have like 1 or 2 regionals maybe in this format, but then we're moving on. So what do you guys think about kind of the post-Worlds meta and how would you rank this format relative to the other ones we played in Scarlet and Violet?
For me, I can't tell. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Urshifu, but I can't really, usually how I determine like if I enjoy a format or not is playing tournaments, and the fact that I've only really played Worlds with like 5 rounds in my run specifically is like, I can't really determine anything. I'm not a huge fan of like the format in general, but I don't feel like it's as bad as people are complaining. I don't know. I feel like it probably needed a bit more room to be explored around, so it's really tough. I don't envy the people who have to play Barcelona at all, who don't know if they're even going to be playing on when the new DLC drops with like 0.5 potentially, like how we had 2014 with Hyper Voice Sylveon being illegal and Grassy Glide Rillaboom could be legal, so I don't envy them at all. But this regulation was fine. It wasn't ideal, but like I don't think it's the worst format I played. I'll just say that.
I think it's the worst format I've played maybe ever. I hate this rule set so much. You know what? And I'm going to say, I don't think that it is objectively terrible, but in terms of the way that I like to play Pokemon, I have never felt so out of my depth. Every way that I think about the game, Regulation D seems to just be like, that's not going to work. Sorry. And I don't like it at all. Yeah, I think it's not objectively terrible, but subjectively, I hate it and I think it's terrible. And that's what I got to say about it.
I will say, I think out of A, B, C, and D, or I guess 1, 2, C and D. Like, it's my least favorite, and I didn't even compete in Worlds. I guess it's interesting because, like, Worlds, it's like you have the best players working to figure out what is objectively what they think is, or subjectively what they think is the best. As a result, have a fairly centralized meta. Like, I don't really expect to see too many crazy things in, like, the post-Worlds regionals. You already know what the strongest teams are, and they're so strong that it's like, are you going to come up with something that can beat all these teams that came out of Worlds? Like, I'm not really sure. But speaking even just from, like, a content perspective and, like, making videos in this format the last couple of months, like, I had a lot of fun when it first came out because I was like, oh, I get to, like, try out all these brand new Hisuian Pokemon and X, Y, and Z, and that was fun. And I think now I'm kind of, like, hitting a wall where I'm like, I just, like, don't really love playing it that much. So I'm personally excited for the next regulation, honestly. I'm kind of looking forward to that already rather than sticking to Regulation D in these next couple of weeks. Well, it'll be interesting to see how the remaining regionals goes, but I think for Scarlet and Violet, I really, really enjoyed all the other formats. And this one is just kind of like, it's like fine, but I don't go out of my way to play it because it's just like not something that really instills that much excitement in me.
I think A was my favorite. A was my favorite just because it was a completely brand new game, had brand new Pokemon to play around with, and that brought so much fun in terms of creativity of what you could do with actual Pokemon. I feel like it's a crime that Meowscarada could not do better in future formats because it was so much fun to use. And I just like, I think to the power creep point, it is really tough when you see just how much those Pokemon fall off. So like Regulation A to B, there were a ton of changes that ended up coming through, and then even from D, just not being able to see all those Hisuian Pokemon was also pretty tragic. And I really do hope that we go to maybe future formats where we actually take a chance to ban some stuff. I don't know. Just throwing that out there as a wish list format. Ban Urshifu, please. Let's see other Pokemon have the light of day. That would be fantastic. So that's my 2 cents. A was the best. Bring on Regulation E.
Regulation A was great, and then for me it's like D after, and then C and D. I think they're tied for me. I honestly, but then again, I think Gen 8 is literally below all of those. I don't like Dynamax.
I like Dynamax. I'm a
I like
believer.
Dynamax.
Yeah, I have a bad feeling that the problems are only going to get worse. It's like, I mean, I haven't seen any leaks for the DLC, but Sword and Shield's DLC, they added Urshifu and Calyrex and Regieleki. And like, I feel like, and even like Galarian Moltres is pretty strong. Like, they added all these really broken Pokemon, and like, if it's also they're adding an 18th Era type or whatever. So I have like I think my issue with the format is the power level. And if like the past DLC is anything to base this off of, I have a feeling that the power level is only going to increase as they add back more old Pokemon in addition to any broken new stuff. So ready for Gen 10? Let's go! Gen 10.
I've said that since the beginning of Gen 9. It's only going to get worse. When we had Terra, and then we had all these new Pokemon getting added back.
It is concerning that we went, like, I agree that my personal ranking is A was the best, then B, then C, then D. So like, I think we should probably be worried about E.
No, you're not ready for like 5 regulations.
We have to hit the bottom at some point, though, right? It's like it can only go so low.
Terra Water Spout would like a word.
Yeah, Terra Water.
I don't even. Oh my gosh! Like, I haven't even thought about playing a restricted format in this.
Here's my nightmare. Ready? Terra Steel Xerneas, or like Terra Water Xerneas, right? Whereas like, now we don't have Dynamax to save us from the horrible deer.
No, my nightmare is if the 18th Terra type or whatever it's called allows you to change the type you want to in the actual game.
I will
that
throw
would be
up.
all.
On that note, I think we're gonna wrap it here.
Hooray!
Yay!
Let's send off Regulation D with, I guess, a few more events down the road. We got the Post-Worlds meta that'll be coming at you at Pittsburgh, Barcelona, and Curitiba to round out the month of September, and then we get a chance to look forward to what Regulation E may bring. But what a interesting way to send off our 2023 calendar year of Pokemon, and we all look forward to seeing what's going to happen in 2024. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Beastcoast Pokemon channel.